Welcome to This Week in Morgan County. I'm your host, Russell Mokhiber, and our guest this week is Morgan County Commissioner Bob Ford. Bob was our commissioner from 2000 to 2006, and he was re-elected again in 2012. Bob, thanks for coming in.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Now, just a little bit of history of yourself. You were born and raised in Hagerstown. Hagerstown, Maryland, which is close by. What was the work of your folks?
You mean like my parents?
Yeah, your parents.
Well, my dad worked for a company in Hagerstown called Pangborn. He left the family when I was about 5 years old, and then my mother struggled for a few years as a single parent, raising a couple of children. And then I was fortunate enough, she met a man that became my stepfather. He was in the trucking industry, and I kind of grew up under his wing, you might say. And that's basically it.
When did you come to Morgan County?
We moved to Morgan County in 1980. We built a house over here. We lived in Hancock. We moved up to Hancock for a couple of years because I didn't want our children growing up in the same environment I grew up in Hagerstown. During that time when I grew up in Hagerstown, the last couple of years of my life there, back in the 60s, Hagerstown was really evolving. It was really changing. Drug culture was moving on pretty good, and I didn't want my kids, and it was really a wake-up call. My wife caught my son and a neighbor boy smoking Lipton tea under the porch. Well, they were smoking tea because they heard this at school. So they literally thought they were smoking Lipton tea, and I came home from work one night and my wife told me that, and I said, I think we need to get out of here. So at that time, we had decided we moved up to Hancock and bought a small farm out over in Hancock, and we was raising pigs. I just kept my kids so busy they couldn't get in trouble. They was busy working, and then some issues came up, and we decided to relocate to Berkeley Springs, so we built a house over here in 1980.
And your business here was Bob's Big Beef?
Not when I moved here. When I moved here, I was just working at Fairchild. I was working in defense contracting. I was a tool and die maker.
Where was Fairchild?
Hagerstown, Maryland.
Hagerstown, okay. So you were commuting?
Yeah, and matter of fact, the guy that I communicated with was the one that created Bob's Big Beef. My family's very family oriented. My kids grew up, they could water ski from the time they could swim, and we socialized with about a half a dozen families at the river every weekend, water skiing and outdoor activities. And a buddy of mine, we'd be riding back and forth to work, and I did all the cooking down the river for about 6 or 7 families, barbecuing and stuff on the weekend outings. And I was complaining about I didn't have enough money, wasn't making enough money at the time to him riding back and forth to work, because my wife had worked at Fairchild also, but she lost her job because Fairchild had made a decision they was going to cease operations in Hagerstown for political reasons. And at that time, my income was cut in half. So I didn't know what to do. I wanted my wife got married. Back when we got married, there was no such thing as welfare. There was no such thing as families being subsidized through the government. You grabbed your bootstraps, you pulled up your boots, and you went to work. And kind of deprived my wife of an education, more or less. We got married, I was in 11th grade, she was in 10th grade. And she went and got her GED, but she decided to go back to college and get a nursing degree. Well, now she's in college, my son's in California fixing to get married, my daughter's graduating high school, and I'm complaining because I got one income. So a buddy of mine says, well, Bobby says, why don't you put together a food trailer, go around and sell beef sandwiches at these festivals? And that's how Bob's Big Beef got started. He even named it, he said, I can see it now, Bob's Big Beef. And that's basically how Bob's Big Beef started. Well, then that was part-time income to subsidize my income at the plant. I was told I would probably lose my job in a couple of years, which I didn't because another company bought Fairchild. But nonetheless, Bob's Big Beef started out with one food trailer, and as it progressed, I had to make a decision. What do I want to do with my life? Well, I kind of analyzed Bob's Big Beef as a path to go, so I wound up resigning from Fairchild. So I quit there, and that's how Bob's Big Beef got started, and we was living here when that happened in 1985.
You were county commissioner from 2000 to 2006. What made you decide in 2012 to run again?
Several reasons. I left a lot of unfinished business here in 2006 when I left office. One has to understand, when I left office, I didn't leave because I was voted out. I left because I had planned to run for the House.
The House of Delegates. in
House
West
of
Virginia.
Delegates in West Virginia because it became an open seat. Charlie Trump had decided he was no longer going to run for re-election, which opened that up. And at that time, I felt I was kind of prepared to take on that role. I had established some good relationships in Charleston with different delegates and representatives through my term as commissioner. And rather than run for the county commission, I opted to run for the House of Delegates then. And as that process went forward, little did I know we would have a major courthouse fire and the courthouse would burn down. I'd already been committed to running for the House, already paid my election fee to run, different things. But then other things started to happen, and Governor Manchin and I didn't see eye to eye on several. I still don't like the way he treated Morgan County. I think he was a good governor for the state.
That was the hospital issue, right? That you
It
guys.
was over the hospital and the bypass, segments of the bypass. And when those talks broke down, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but anyway, I just didn't feel comfortable going to Charleston. I mean, I felt in my mind I could have won that seat. I'd have been opposing Darrell Coles at the time. I had a lot of good connections.
And you were a Democrat at the time.
I was a Democrat at the time. I had a lot of good connections in Charleston. I had a lot of good connections with Hampshire County for support. Matter of fact, sent back over close to $15,000 in contributions. And those checks came and I didn't even ask for it. I just wake up, go to the mailbox, and there'd be a check in there from somebody, wanting to buy their way into politics.
So you were actually in that race, then pulled out.
Yes. And I went to the county clerk's office one day when I became really frustrated with the whole thing, and I just told Debbie Kiesecker at that time, I said, Debbie, what do I have to do to have my name removed from the ballot? I decided not to run. And she said, well, I'm glad you're here today because they were going to press next week. So we withdrew from the race. And I decided at that time I had enough of politics. But then little did I know that 4 or 5 years later, zoning would become a major issue in the county.
And that drove you back in.
Well, people in that group came to me and asked me if I would come to their meeting, and I did. And then after about the second meeting, they asked me if I would chair the committee, which I agreed to do.
This is the anti-zoning people.
The anti-zoning group, correct. And once that happened and we felt we were successful, that we beat zoning back.
It was like an 80-20 vote against.
Yeah,
It was a pretty bad one.
pretty bad one. But we were successful, and again,
Let me stop you there for a sec, because I want to ask you about this. I thought about this reading the paper this week, where the commission, you included, decided to buy the building next to the courthouse and tear it down.
correct.
And if certain things happen, that'll be torn down. And it's sort of a dilapidated building, and it's a good thing that it's going to be torn down probably. It was probably a good move.
Correct. We tried to take care of that when we built the courthouse, but it wasn't for sale then.
Right. Well, here's the thought that came to my mind. Let's say the owners of that property wanted to put a strip club in there. Would they have been allowed to put a strip club?
Well, I'd have to look at the mathematical calculations, because what you're asking me is under our adult entertainment ordinance. And we struggled with that when the legislature dumped that in our lap. They gave us the authority to deal with where we could locate adult entertainment industries.
This is while you were commissioner first.
When I was commissioner the first time, and we labored with that. And we felt at that time the ordinance that we adopted had protected just about any school, church, or residence. If you go back and read that ordinance, it's pretty tough to locate one of them in Morgan County. You can't write an ordinance that would make it impossible. But we went,
Well, my point is,
as
though,
extreme as we go. So to answer your question, no, they could not locate.
they could not locate it there. So my point is, and did you support that legislation?
Yes.
Okay. So my point is that is in effect zoning. You're telling a private owner that they cannot build a strip club in certain places in the county.
We tailored our ordinance pretty much under the ABC regulations, which protects people that it's not in your face. Okay?
I get it, but would you agree you're telling a private owner you cannot build a strip club at that spot or next to a school or next to a church?
In a particular case where something is that in your face, that deals with morality issues, deal with a whole host of issues that are different than the average issue, I felt comfortable doing that.
Okay. And my only point is zoning is like a sliding scale, that on strip clubs, dirty bookstores, morality kinds of issues, as you put it, the state can tell a private owner, no, you can't do it. And you approve of that policy. You approve of the state telling a private owner you can't do that at that spot.
Yes.
Okay. Now, on the question, so this leads to the broader question of how we want our county to look.
I agree.
All right. And there is, you got to admit, there's a couple of major factions. There are people who believe that this is a beautiful spot and tourism should be the driving force in the economy. And there's others, like yourself, who believe, no, we need more than that. We need small businesses, we need industry, we need that. And that should be above and beyond tourism.
I think you can have both ways. Again, I divert, when people talk to me about zoning, it's a very interesting topic because I've always believed, I'm not anti-zoning. I'm only anti-zoning to the point zoning breeds corruption. And as I was a sitting commissioner before, we had many people approach us. That's why I didn't understand Commissioner Hutchison driving zoning the way she did, because she chose, like, we totally ignored that. The county commission, when I sat in office before, we never ignored zoning. We just never seen where zoning worked. We asked everybody that came before us, just bring us a county. Show me the blueprint where it works. Because here's the problem with zoning. And I see it every day. I spend a lot of time on the Eastern Shore. I drive through Howard County. I drive through Carroll County.
You spend summers there sometimes, right? You have a place.
Yes, I have a place there, and I spend a lot of time there. And I've been going there for 40 years. And as I went there, I drove through miles and miles of beautiful farmland, only to drive through Frederick County, and it's townhouse after townhouse. And then when you get into Howard County, it's $1 million house after $1 million house. I'm talking about high dollar subdivisions. I can remember a time of day it was all agriculture. It was zoned agricultural, only to have it turn around and zone, because when the money players come to town, that stuff changes. Politics change, zoning boards change, and it all changes. My point with zoning is, and I cautioned the group when I chaired them, I said, look, I could argue for zoning just as much as you want to argue against it. Here's the problem is, if you could zone Morgan County today, and you could assure me that 50 years from now it would look exactly like it does today, I'd probably be on your side. That doesn't happen. The counter happens, because once you say, okay, this much real estate's restricted for this, it's restricted for that, they all get different values placed on them. But when you run into a shortage of that, all of a sudden they dip into that agricultural. And the next thing you know, the county, after 10 or 15 years of zoning, looks nothing like the original zoning ordinance. That's why it's corrupt. That's why I oppose it. I think the way you address people's concerns is through a strong planning commission that has rules that people follow. And if it's noise abatement or if it's site abatement, you deal with these issues through voluntary measures. That's just my view of zoning.
And we're going to have to take a break now, but it's devolved into now battles over individual kind of businesses, and let's get to that after the break. Sure. We'll be right back.